Perfect. Well, welcome everybody to Wildlife Wednesday. We had a special series of Wildlife Wednesdays, and this is actually one of the encore sessions from some issues that we wanted to cover in the community so that people had access to the information to learn a little bit more. So we're very excited to welcome Nathan Schmidt, who's going to talk to us tonight about Save Ricardo Ranch. So this is a volunteer-run education event hosted by Calgary Urban Species Response Team. I'm Kathleen Johnson. I'm one of the co-founders of the organization, and I'm joined by Marissa and by Anne. And Marissa and Anne lead our education group who help to coordinate and take care of all the details on events like tonight. And again, it's all volunteer run. Our speakers also come on their own time. We don't have a budget, so they all come as a gift to us for these sessions. So we're really grateful for that. So importantly, I just want to note that in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, the Calgary Urban Species Response Team strives to reduce urban risks to wildlife and support mindful care of local ecology and share meaningful opportunities to learn together and encourage participation. We gratefully acknowledge the Indigenous peoples and traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Kainai, the Siksika, and the Piikani, as well as the Yaqsi Nakota and Tsuut'ina Nation and Métis Nation of Alberta, region number 3. So we're really excited to introduce you to Nathan Schmidt. I have checked with him. He's okay with Nathaniel or with Nathan. And Nathan is a soon-to-be lawyer. He is a community activist working in an array of community advocacy projects. He's on the board of directors of the Alberta Wilderness Association and collaborates with other environmental groups in Calgary. His day job is with legal aid, the criminal defense, where he helps low-income Albertans navigate the court system. So welcome, Nathan. And while you get prepared to share your presentation, I'll just give a little bit of housekeeping. We really value this as being a safe and informal, but really respectful atmosphere where everybody should feel comfortable to come forward with any questions that you have. And, so please feel free to engage. So Nathan will give us a presentation. I understand, Nathan, and are you okay with questions during, or would you like us to hold our questions till afterwards? Will that be easier for you?
Yeah, maybe afterwards. I'll try to get through all the material in 45 minutes or less, and then we can really open it up for a discussion, especially because I see that there are, especially Anne and Bill from Calgary River Valleys here, who I might actually defer to in some cases if they're okay with that and able to do that, because they have some expertise beyond my own that I think they'd be able to fill people in really well. I was actually going to reference some of their reports, but I think I'll leave that for them to actually speak to these things directly at some point. So yeah, questions after, if everybody's okay with that, works great.
100%. That is fantastic. So we'll do that. And then after, please stay on after for questions and answers. And we'll continue to record through some of the Q&A, because a lot of times that's where some of the really great information comes out, is from your questions. So keep those in mind or put them in the chat for us to ask later. And yeah, and we do keep this as an open time when you can just be with other like-minded people. So don't feel you have to rush off at the end. We're happy to stay on and chat with you as well. So, well, Nathan, this is really great to have you. I think it's just really important that we have access to this information of things that are going on in the community. A lot of times we see the headlines, but we don't really know a lot about what's going on and behind the scenes. So really grateful that you're here to talk to us about what we're hearing as Save Ricardo Ranch. So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to share your screen there. And I'm just really grateful that you're here. So thank you for that.
No problem. And thank you so much to you and everyone in your organization for inviting me. And it's I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to talk more about this, because it's a crucial time for Ricardo Ranch. So I'll get things going here. Good evening, everyone. I suppose you all know who I am now. And so as I go through this presentation, I'll try to get through all the main points, and then stick around for as long as needed to chat. So this first slide here, you can see a picture of Ricardo Ranch, which I think gives a good impression of the scope and the how stunning this area is, which was what originally caught my eye when it came to advocating for this particular area. Now, as far as the presentation goes, I'll start with some background in history. There was some background about me, which I'll just skip now because Kathleen did such a great job. And then I'll talk about municipalities, climate change and biodiversity, why Ricardo Ranch in Calgary, and then sort of give an overview of everything that's happened so far and things that are going to happen. And a lot of the presentation won't focus specifically on Ricardo Ranch because Ricardo Ranch is really just a symbol of some of the greater issues that we face in municipalities, not only in Calgary, but around North America and the world. And I wanted to use this as an opportunity to also maybe inspire some of you to become involved in municipal issues, whether that be through equity or environmental or transit, all those kinds of things that affect many different aspects of what we're trying to do with climate change and the environment. So there'll be a lot on Ricardo Ranch, but there will be a lot about municipal advocacy in general as well, because even after doing it for almost 3 years now, I still find it confusing. So it's a really dense area, and the more people we can introduce and getting out to these things, the better. Just a note that that photo there that was taken from one of my trips in Ricardo Ranch, and that is an eastern kingbird there. All right, so that's me, a board member of Alberta Wilderness Association, and I see our executive director, Deborah Donnelly, is here tonight, so thanks to her for coming by as well. And I believe Lindsay Wallace is here too, who's on staff there. So yeah, I'm just about a lawyer, criminal law, but my real passion is environmental law. And I advocate for many different issues and do consider myself an urbanist, which I will talk a little bit more about later. So this background in history, I tried to create something that wasn't too confusing here because I wanted to explain how I got involved in these things, because as I've learned more about advocacy and gotten more involved, I still struggle with how people connect with issues and how they get connected to different people and different organizations. So this sort of maps out my own journey towards becoming involved with Ricardo Ranch, which really was a surprise that this picked up. I didn't expect this much of it to catch on, but I'm extremely happy that it has, because it means that we want things to change. And that's how I got involved in this in the first place as well. So it started with ecological advocacy back in 2017 or 2018. I started volunteering with the Alberta Wilderness Association. And that really connected me with a lot of different aspects of ecological advocacy in Alberta. And that's going to be something that I suggest to everybody later. If you're asking yourself right now, well, I'd love to get involved, the first step is volunteer with people that are already engaged, because you can learn so much from them. So from there, I became really interested in biodiversity and habitat protection, which are the two things that drive me in everything that I do. So climate change, of course, is the umbrella that covers everything, but the particular part of climate change that I'm interested in is habitat and the species that live within it. And so that when I decided to go back to law, I had another career for about 10 years. It was with that in mind. So then I thought, well, okay, I want to start making some real change. I live here in Calgary, and that is what connected me to civic activism, because it's something that we can all connect to, because it's I remember there's the famous, I think it was Nietzsche that said something like, I'm paraphrasing, this is going to be wrong, but he said, if the federal government stops working, you'll notice in a month. If the provincial government starts working, you'll notice in a week. If the municipal government stops working, you'll notice in a day. And so that's really how I was able to connect to these issues, was municipally and through urbanism specifically, which connects to things like city building, density, and preservation. And this can be kind of a touchy area because it's a focal point for disagreements within communities. So I might say some things tonight that you disagree with, and you know, I'm happy to have a discussion about that here as well, because I spend all day in a courtroom, so I'm totally open to people disagreeing with what I say. And however, the city building density and preservation, I see those things as connecting, because so many of us live in cities now, and the way we build our cities can affect so many different things, and especially our environment. Now, specifically, so why choose municipal? So we see, and hopefully this isn't too confusing the way, I'm not a PowerPoint guy, so I tried my best here. But, you know, we have the different levels of government. So we have the federal government, the provincial government, which are both enclosed in our constitution. So they're both constitutional entities, which means that they're very powerful, and that they have certain responsibilities and powers that have been there since this country was founded. Now, municipal governments are interesting because they're actually a creature of the provincial government through the Municipal Government Act. So municipalities only exist through provinces, and each province does it slightly differently. But here in Alberta, it's through our own Municipal Government Act, which tells cities what they are and aren't allowed to do. Now, through the municipality, we have a direct connection to people. And you can see that I've put accessible politicians, no party ideology, and meaningful issues. So this is important because if there's something that you care about, you can email your councillor. And your councillor, you know, we think on a more micro level there, because an MP has a certain population, an MLA has a certain population, and a councillor has an even smaller population. So you can connect with them in a more meaningful way at times, I find personally, because it's a direct connection to somebody that also lives in your community even closer. Now, no party ideology. There were just municipal elections in British Columbia. Vancouver has political parties. But in Calgary, we don't have political parties. And so what I find is that you can have more honest discussions with our councillors because they're not towing a party line. You can actually talk about concepts with them that matter to you, and they will often listen in a more meaningful way because they know they have what their constituents want to do. They have their alliances within City Hall, but there's not an overarching structure that controls their agenda. And so I think that means that we can actually be more creative sometimes in our municipal government, at least here in Calgary and in Edmonton, because we're still yet to be connected to any greater party system. And I think it would actually be a shame if that happened. So anyways, we won't talk politics too much. And then meaningful issues. So what I mean by that is you can see these things happening right in your community. So Ricardo Ranch, it's all in our city. We can all get there somewhat easily if we have a vehicle, especially, but it's accessible. It's 35 kilometers from downtown, and it's connected right here. And so all of the different city issues affect all of us directly. Of course, as the former mayor said, if our municipal government stops functioning, we'll notice in a day. So Ricardo Ranch, however, I believe is more important in scope than just with the city of Calgary, which I'll talk a bit more about later. So again, connecting municipalities to environmental issues. So why did I choose municipal politics to really become involved in? Well, first off, cities have a huge footprint here. So this, I've always been told not to put too much text into PowerPoints, but I think this explains things better than I could, that we see that the share of our population living in rural areas decreased from 2016 to 2021. So a huge majority of our country is living in urban areas, which means that the decisions that we make have a huge impact on our environment and on climate change, because that's where most of us live. And the way we live in those cities has a feedback effect to all the different things we decide to do. So if everybody has 2 cars and everybody lives in a city, then our cities are going to be full of cars. We're going to need to produce more cars. We're going to create more greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see what I mean by all of that. Now, if our cities are built differently, if our urban areas are built differently, then we can have a huge effect on different aspects of the environment, even if it's only for this specific municipality, say in Calgary. Well, Calgary requires a huge amount of resources to function as a municipality. So the more we change through that, the more of an effect that we can have on our province and on our country and on the world. So next, cities are often as well, and this is something I find very interesting, they're biodiversity hotspots. Now this text that I included from WWF Canada, and they have a really excellent set of articles and interactive features about urban ecology and the way that our cities are built, which I think if you can all, you can see the link down there, and I'd be happy to share this PowerPoint as well. I'll send it to Kathleen, and if she has an email list, we can share it with everybody after. And any spelling mistakes you can have as well. So we can see here, city growth has doubled over the last century. 80% of original wetland habitats were converted. Dams, canals, and buildings and roads have also altered habitat. And then it leads to habitat loss from all these other things, as I was speaking about that feedback effect, that how people function in cities affects forestry, agriculture, industrial development. So the other part that's interesting, and there's an institute in Stockholm that talks a lot about this, the name escapes me now, but cities themselves, because we are animals too, we chose to build cities where there is a richness of different, in our environment so that we could survive, with maybe the exception of Regina because the railway went through there and they built up a city because of that. But anyways, that my parents, one of my dad's from Regina, so I can make fun of it a little bit. And I think he's here tonight too. So, however, Calgary, we can see that we're at a confluence of different ecosystems in Alberta. So we have Aspen Parkland, we have wetlands with the river valley, we have grasslands. We're right on the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And you can see why that historically Indigenous peoples and then settlers, when they came here, chose Calgary as a place to settle. The same thing can be said for Edmonton. We build around rivers, we build around waterways because that's where our resources come from. And it just so happens that animals also choose to live around waterways and areas of rich, there's food and there's shelter, and there's, especially here, places for migratory birds to stop. There's places for animals that can survive throughout the winter. And so it becomes something where we are interacting with animals on a daily basis. And again, our actions affect the biodiversity that is still in our city. Now, Calgary, to give Calgary credit, is very aware of these issues. So when you look through city policies, we have a wetland conservation policy, we have a biodiversity strategy, we now have a climate strategy, we have our municipal development plan, which is very aware of how our city building affects the environment around us. Now, those are idealistic policies that we have. In practice, are we following them? I'm not sure. Sometimes we are and sometimes we aren't. And so that's why we're here today talking about Ricardo Ranch. So going through some of the procedural history, and so this photo that you can see here, this is from Deerfoot Trail is the roadway, and then you can just see the Bow River a little bit in the distance. And so Ricardo Ranch then would move, and actually I think I can, oh, I guess I didn't figure out how to do this. Oh no, here we go. Laser pointer. Everybody can see this, I think, right? So right going this way is Ricardo Ranch in this area, the former Ricardo Ranch. So that was the name of the family that owned a ranch that actually is still being used with, there are still cattle that are using the escarpment. And so the development that we're talking about is going to fill up this hill all up here and it goes for kilometers along the top. And then there will be also development in the river valley here, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well, and talk about why that's concerning. Although I think on a practical level, if we lived here in 2013, we can all understand why it's probably not a good idea to build there. And so then the interesting thing as well is there's another community on the other side here called Cranston that's already been built. And so we're going to essentially replicate that community on this side over here. So the procedural history, I just wanted to put in two documents that have a significant effect on the decisions that go into building this. We have our municipal development plan, which is an overarching statutory document that tells the city, our councilors and our administration about how we should build the city. So for example, that we have balanced development in the inner city, and then what's called greenfield development is a big part of the municipal development plan. We're nowhere near the goal set in that plan. Right now, we're still, from what I've heard varying numbers, but anywhere from 80% greenfield to 20% established, or 90% greenfield to 10% established. So Ricardo Ranch is what's called a greenfield development. So in 2016, we had the Ricardo Ranch Area Structure Plan. And so the Area Structure Plan is a high-level document put out by planners at the city that says, you know, here's a part that the city owns that's undeveloped, and this is what it could look like. And so it gives developers and the public an idea of what, on a high level, without any specific land use planning, this area could be used for. And so that was put out, I think I said 2016, I believe it was actually 2018 that document was put out. We also have our citywide growth strategy from 2023 to 2026, which then also featured the approval of business cases at committee, which was recently at council. Ricardo Ranch was part of those business cases. There were 4 others, which are also, unfortunately, in areas that have significant environmental assets, we could call them natural assets or climate assets. I'll speak a little bit about that later as well. We also had recently in council the removal of the growth management overlays for Ricardo Ranch, which is a different function, a different piece of procedure that was put in place, where the city is able to take a step back and analyze how we build in a certain area and whether it's feasible. So those were removed for this area in order to allow development to continue. I won't go really in depth into what those mean. Those are being debated by council right now. I mean, I'll get some things wrong if I talk about them specifically, which again, when I'm talking about how complicated these things are, the only thing you need to know is that they were removed by a vote of council, which allowed development to ostensibly begin once the approval of the business cases comes up at budget, which is on November 4th. And then once we get through the land use planning process in the Calgary and CPC here. So these, now I specified upcoming, because when we talk about what it is you can do, well, they need to hear from us that we have a problem with this development, and we have a problem with the business case, and that we have a problem with land use planning in this area. So we'll talk about that a bit later, but hopefully that gives you an idea of all the things that have come together to lead to the potential development of this area. And this is something that happens with a lot of the new developments, or with all of the new developments in Calgary, that we call sometimes edge developments. And so they go through this process, and you know, we often hear about Calgary's sprawl and how big we are as a city. And it is true that we have one of the lowest densities of any major city in North America, and that we continue to grow out. However, it is important to note as well that Calgary is a unique case because we are a unicity. So we made a decision, and an easy example that we can use is, say, the lower mainland. So we have Vancouver, Richmond, Burnaby, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, all the Surrey, all the different places that form different municipalities that in Calgary's case are all absorbed into one big municipality. So it changes how decisions are made, and it changes our approach to decisions as well. Okay, so moving on to municipalities, climate change, and biodiversity. So Calgary is a unique city, not only for being a unicity, but also because of the natural assets that we have left remaining, which is when I get to speaking about Calgary and Ricardo Ranch in particular, which is why I believe this is so important and why this is a big opportunity for us to build our city better, and also to perhaps be an example for other municipalities, because we have 693 natural areas, some of the biggest being the Weaselhead, Nose Hill, Griffith Woods, and Fish Creek, which is provincial, but it's still contained within the city. And then this 2021 data from the Canadian City Parks Institution, which is also a fantastic resource, is that we have the most parkland per 1,000 people in Canada, which is impressive. Now, there's some other issues about equity around where that parkland is located and who can access it in our city. However, given that we don't want to spend the rest of the night here, we won't go specifically into that, but that is something that also comes up in planning. And that's why municipal and civic activism can be so important, because we have areas of our city that are much better served than others when it comes to access to our environment. And that's something, especially with climate change becoming, and all the heat related to that, drought, and those kinds of things, that access to these areas becomes, I mean, I believe it's a right for people to be able to access these spots, and certain people in our city have a much harder time doing that than others. So 53% of that total parkland is natural area. And so that's almost 5,000 hectares, which is a significant amount for a large municipality to have. Now, there's also some discussion about the state of our natural areas. So Nose Hill is often used as a shining example of what can be done. And it was actually saved by a group of activists that essentially forced the city's hand to buy Nose Hill from developers and save it, which is amazing. And it would be equally amazing if we could force their hand with Ricardo Ranch, although to be completely frank with you, I'm not sure that's going to happen. But we have an opportunity to make things better. And again, I'll get to that a little bit later as well. Now, the thing about our natural areas and why we need to think about them so carefully is that a place like Nose Hill has in some senses become a little bit of an ecological wasteland. And here is one of the controversial things I'm going to say, is that if we want natural areas to be natural, we have to create rules in them. And part of municipal activism is saying what is reserved for people and what is reserved for nature. And Nose Hill is one big off-leash dog area. And as a result, the species that have used that area traditionally for nesting, now it was a gravel pit at one point, so they would have left that, especially when it was a gravel pit. But now that it is an open grassland birds have to nest oftentimes close to the ground. Off-leash dogs disturb that. They disturb coyotes, and they disturb other animals that use these areas. And so part of my activism in Calgary has been pointing out areas that I don't think dogs should be allowed to be in anymore. Now, that often has me in conflict with the dog community, and I love dogs. I grew up with dogs, but certain places dogs just should not be. And there's some interesting statistics about disturbance when you're in a natural area, and these aren't going to be 100% accurate, but when we bring a dog, an off-leash dog, through a natural area, the disturbance can go up to, I believe, about 90 meters. A bike is about 60 meters, whereas people walking is about 10 to 20 meters. And so we have to think about the types of activities that we do as well. And I'm bringing this up because as part of the Ricardo Ranch plans, we're going to have access and pathways to this area that is already disturbed, but that I think deserves to be protected. And by having 10,000 people living in that area with access to it and access to the most sensitive parts, we have to consider what kind of impacts that is going to have. Now, you might think, well, that just conflicts with what you said about people having access to nature and to parks. Well, we can have access to it, but once you have the encroachment of people living in houses, and you can have living abutting the remaining places that will be protected as part of what's called environmental reserve, then we are going to change that area. Whereas if it was protected and we allowed some public access in a careful way and no one was living down there, then we could do so in a way that respects and allows nature to thrive. Okay, so what I want you to take from this slide is that we have an opportunity to build our city differently and to preserve what we have managed not to destroy at this point, which compared to any other city in North America is significant. But here's the bad news. So what we're losing with these 5 new business cases, which includes Ricardo Ranch, so you can see the 2022 proposed business cases that are in the red and the pinkish color here, is we're losing 300 hectares of climate assets, including wetlands, grasslands, and aspen parkland. We're also losing the opportunity to create density and walkable communities. Now, this sometimes creates the statement here, creates disagreement because these communities are being built differently. So the communities within themselves, these little micro cities that we're building, are walkable within that community in some instances. But are they walkable in the sense that you can walk to a train and get downtown? Ricardo Ranch is 35 kilometers from downtown. It's built past the Green Line, which is in the process of being built now. So is it truly a walkable community if your only choice is to drive 70 kilometers a day to get to work? I would argue that it's not. And so there's different definitions in the way that we see these things, and that are these communities out here truly walkable? And do they truly allow us to have alternative transportation options? Because also these additional communities here in Simons Valley and up here are also out of range of the Green Line. And so we had the opportunity here to say, okay, we're putting in all of this money into a new transit line and we're building these communities outside of that. Does that make sense? Again, given that we have one of the lowest densities of any major city in North America. To me, it doesn't make sense. And you can see that we have no shortage of new communities being built in Calgary, and most of them won't be finished being built for at least another 5 years. So we have a lot more opportunity for housing to be built here in these yellow areas that are in progress. But we're sort of putting the cart before the horse, in my opinion, by the continuation of the approval of new communities. And what's more, most of the communities located within here are losing population every year, and our infrastructure is suffering. I live in Glendale, which is kind of over here in this area, and we might not have enough population to support schools in another 10 years because our population is decreasing. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, which I'm going to get to in a moment. I keep saying that, but it'll come up here too because everything connects. But we are putting so many resources into putting people in this part of the city when this part of the city is slowly decaying. And so that's another aspect of civic activism that can be connected to also environmental activism. By advocating for better environmental decisions, you also advocate for better communities and established communities and in areas where we've already decided to build. Okay, so how do we stop this? Well, there's really, in my opinion, one answer, and it's called density. And what that means is that we need to start building our city in the public interest. And so there are a few different things that come from that. So first, it's that we're not following our own statutory documents at times in the city and our own policies. By continuing to build out, we're not following our own municipal development plan. At the same time, our councillors have a very difficult job because every time there are campaigns and proposals from our city to increase density in established communities, there is widespread public opposition, often based on misinformation, I might add. And so it comes to the point where people are saying, if you build this fourplex in my neighborhood, I'm not going to be able to park on the street anymore. Well, hey, guess what? Maybe we shouldn't all get to park on the street because it's not our street. It's everybody's street. And by not allowing that fourplex to be built, say in my neighborhood of Glendale, the population of the school decreases, and then we're forced to build in Ricardo Ranch. And so again, when we talk about feedback, we can see that by not densifying the inner city, by not densifying established communities, by continuing to let our population drain, we have to build new communities because housing in the inner city becomes less affordable because there's less of it. And then we have more people living on the fringes, and we keep eating up the natural assets we have left. So one thing that I hope everybody comes away from this talk with tonight is that when the city is telling us that we need to densify, that here is what we need to make our established areas have a greater population, have tighter buildings, have more duplexes, more fourplexes. Think carefully about what that means and what effect that can have on climate change and biodiversity. And if you don't believe me, here's some stats. So the University of Texas at Austin did a study that showed that low density communities produce nearly 4 times the greenhouse gas emissions as higher density alternatives. So huge contributor to climate change right there. University of Michigan found that doubling urban density reduces emissions from household travel by half and residential energy use by 1/3. So again, when we talk about our transition to clean energy, what about reducing our energy? That's a huge factor in all of this. And by spreading out our communities, we require more energy. And so again, we can have a feedback effect by densifying where we live. Now, people in walkable communities drive 1/4 less. Again, greenhouse gas emissions are down. You need fewer highways. Think of the Ring Road. The Ring Road was a hugely destructive construction project on places like the Weaselhead, on Fish Creek. And it's because we thought we needed to drive more. And if we built our city differently, we wouldn't need something like the Ring Road to be built. And a plus of all these things is that we become healthier. Driving every day to work is one of the worst things for us. We drive to work, we sit in our car for 40 minutes. You get to work, you sit at your desk all day, you drive home for 40 minutes, and you become stagnant. Now, if you live in a community where you can bike to the C train, and you can bring your bike on the C train all the time now, then guess what? You're biking to the C train, you're standing on the C train, you're getting off the C train, and you're going to work. And you're doing the same thing when you come home, and you're moving, and you're not using greenhouse gases to get where you go. And then studies from Florida, Australia, and everywhere around the world show that urban sprawl drives habitat loss, as cities are often built in areas of high biodiversity, which is something I've already talked about. And in Calgary's case, we can see that with Ricardo Ranch because we have already destroyed 90% of the wetlands on the bow within Calgary city limits. And we're set to have a huge effect on one of the few that is remaining that is undeveloped. So some basic statistics as well. Transportation is second only to oil and gas as a source of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. So we drive less, we bring down our impact on the climate. And what's even worse is that these greenhouse gases from transportation rose 32% over the last 30 years, exactly in the time when we're supposed to be producing less. The United Nations shows us that 75% of land-based and 66% of marine environment have been significantly altered, as well as 75% of freshwater environments. And guess what Ricardo Ranch is? It's a freshwater environment that we are affecting because we refuse to build our cities differently. So, as a conclusion of this section, poorly designed cities destroy biodiversity and increase greenhouse gases. It's as simple as that, in my opinion. So if we build our cities differently, then we can have a positive feedback on our environment and on our own health and on the biodiversity and greenhouse gases, for the biodiversity around us and the greenhouse gases that we produce. So why Ricardo Ranch in Calgary? Well, I touched on this a bit, but because Ricardo Ranch is a huge opportunity to protect what is right now a wildlife corridor that has huge climate assets for us. Wetlands are a carbon sink, as are grasslands. And so you can see, guess what? This is such a unique area. Now, this pond does not occur here naturally. However, nature has grown around it. And we have a healthy wetland abutting a disturbed but potentially what could become again a healthy grassland. Grasslands and wetlands are one of the two most significant carbon sinks we have. And this all along here that you see is going to be houses soon. This all right here is going to be houses soon. It's going to be roads. It's going to be hard surfaces. To me, it boggles my mind that the city is making this decision. However, one thing that I also want to emphasize is I've met with city planners, I've met with developers. There are no evil people in this discussion. There's nobody that's bad and there's nobody that's good. Everybody is working within the frameworks that through decades we've given ourselves to do these things. And it's incumbent upon us to tell the people in charge that this shouldn't be how it is anymore. And if we tell those people that we're tired of this, and then they're going to say to the people who are only following the rules that they're given, sorry, the rules are different now, you can't do this anymore. And that's how we can make these changes. So specifically with Ricardo Ranch, there's some important species. There's the last remaining heron rookery in Calgary. There's also evidence of a bank swallow colony within this area. Now, here are two concerning things. The development is going to be built within what is the recommended radius to protect the heron rookery. So there's a radius of 1,000 meters that's suggested. They're going to be building within 750 meters. And they're also going to be building well within what the recovery strategy for the bank swallow says should be a setback, which is, I believe, about 2.5 kilometers from a colony. And so both of these species now use this area, which tells you a lot about the area as well, because they are both sensitive species. 99% of bank swallows in Canada have been extirpated, which means a local extinction event. So we've lost 99% of our bank swallows, which means we've lost 99% of their habitat, which means we've destroyed that habitat. We only have one heron rookery left in Calgary. There used to be one in Fish Creek. We made some bad decisions in that area. It's gone. This is the last one they have left. They're not a threatened species like the bank swallows yet, but they're sensitive, which means it's not going to be long until they're threatened as well. So another thing, which I've already mentioned, is it's a huge carbon sink. So we see here, I've put two pictures together. We have examples of the wetland here and some of the wetter areas. And you can see this is the bank swallow colony all along here. And then we also have a healthy riparian or river ecosystem, which includes grassland here as well. And all of the other plant species we find with that. So we have our climate strategy. We're trying to reach net zero by 2050. And what the city doesn't really include in those metrics is that to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, well, we should be including these climate assets. There should be a natural valuation of these things. Things like the social cost of carbon, for example, or putting externalities into the way things are built. Because if we included the loss of these areas in our metrics for building these new developments, they wouldn't be built because we would tell ourselves, sorry, the cost is too high. And it's ironic to be saying this as we just had a 24-degree day on October 19th in Calgary. So it's mind-boggling. Now, there's also an opportunity. So the pictures I've included here this is another one of the areas that's slated to be developed as part of these 5 new edge developments. This is near Simons Valley as part of what's called the Glacier Ridge Area Structure Plan. So this is West Nose Creek. And so you can see again, we have a disturbed area that has potential to be brought back. And we can see variety once more in the fact that we have what could be a healthy grassland, which is an endangered ecosystem in Canada. And less than 2% of them are protected in Alberta. And we also have a waterway going through here as well. And like Ricardo Ranch, this is going to be housing all pretty soon and development. Now, people, of course, need a place to live. Affordability is a real concern that we all have. But part of changing our policy and part of densifying, part of building in established areas is that, and part of facing up to climate change is that we're going to have to start to create regulations about how much money we can make from the housing market at some point. Now, that's something we won't get into tonight, but do we really need to build all these new houses? Will they affect affordability? I don't think so, because Ricardo Ranch is being advertised as live next to nature, live next to the Bow River. What does that tell you? I don't think any of those houses are going to be less than $1 million. So that's not affordable for me and my family, and I can't imagine that's affordable for many of us here tonight. And so these places aren't really solving the affordability crisis. So what's been done and what's next? I'll give you kind of an overview in the last 5 minutes we have here about what, or not that there's no time limit, the last 5 minutes that I've given myself tonight to talk about this. But the picture here, this was the first walk we did at Ricardo Ranch. There were about 80 people there, including Councillor Spencer from Ward 12, who is the councillor in this area, who has been very involved in a meaningful way. And I've very much appreciated the amount of attention that he's given this issue. And we all also have to appreciate that his job isn't easy, that we can tell him this is a bad idea, but we aren't the only people telling him what should be done. And that's why we need to be loud, because the louder we are, we don't have a lot of money. The developers have more money than we do, but we could have more voices. And so that's important. So here's what's been done. So there's been 2 advocacy walks in Ricardo Ranch. One was last weekend with a couple of church groups and others that came. There was about 30 people, and then 80 people in the weekends before. We've met with councillors, developers, and city planners, which has not come with any sort of concrete results. But what it's done is given us some more insight into what we can do. And I hope that it's also given them some other things to think about as well. There's been consultation with partner groups. So Calgary River Valleys, for example, who's here tonight, Alberta Wilderness Association, which is the group that I am with. Their CPAWS, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, came out. Calgary Climate Hub. These are all different groups that have a huge amount of knowledge and resources that they've been contributing to this. I've made 4 submissions at council meetings now at this point about this issue. Others have done so as well. There's been talks with all different media organizations, including CTV, CBC, Global, Livewire, the Sprawl, the Narwhal, that have all come out to these things. And there's been some strategizing too, because like I said before, city politics and especially land use planning politics is not easy. And there's a lot of different parts and there's a lot of different things that happen. And then we're told, sorry, this can't be done now. This is already passed. It's easy to miss deadlines because we all have jobs. So, council meetings happen during the day. It can be impossible to even know what's coming up in council and then to actually be able to attend those things. And so I hope none of my bosses are here tonight because I did make submissions during work hours at some of these things. And I guess this will be on YouTube now, so they'll know that. But this is what's been done. And so what's next? So there's the budget hearings on November 4th. I might have gotten that date wrong. Check that. But if you feel so compelled, I'm going to post my email at the end. I would really encourage anybody who's here tonight that thinks they want to do something, just send me an email. We'll add you to our list. We're going to send out some instructions about how to do all these things. And it's hard to get past the threshold of doing it, but once you're past that threshold, it's actually very easy to make your voice heard. Just the process of getting there is hard. There's land use planning in the Calgary Planning Commission, which will be the next step. And that's going to be actually one of the most important steps, because that's when they actually look at the area and say, what are we going to do? How are we going to build this? What's going to be environmental reserve? What's going to be parkland? What's going to be road? What's going to be all that stuff? That's going to be a really important part. And that's coming up in the next months here. There's different legal strategies. So again, as I said at the beginning, we have federal to provincial to municipal. And so when all those funnel down, municipal is affected by all of those things. So there's federal laws that apply to us. There's provincial laws that apply to us. There's our municipal bylaws that apply to us. So there are also more opportunities to fight these things sometimes because there are more laws. Municipal laws don't apply to the federal government. The federal government has to listen to some things, but they're not considering municipal laws necessarily when they're making their decisions. But we have to consider, in some cases, federal laws. So in this case, the Species at Risk Act, for example, applies to migratory birds, even if they're on private land. These bank swallows are potentially on private land, so there's something that we can do. The Water Act in Alberta is something that will have to go and be applied to this when we get more specifically into land use planning. So there's different things that we can try to do there as well. If you're a legal mind and you want to contribute to this, or you know somebody that's a legal mind that would be interested, I mean, that's the biggest thing for a lot of this. So resurgence in the media. So we want to bring attention to this again when it comes up, because they were, the media moves in cycles. So they were paying attention when this first came up. They're not going to report about this every week. So then we need to, again, create an opportunity for them to pay attention again. There's continued contact with partners, public and other actors. So that's why I'm so thankful for this tonight, because this continues that contact with the community and it keeps it on people's minds. And then there's pressure, which is all of those things combined leads to pressure on all of the people that are involved in this to do something differently. Okay, so I used the same picture twice, didn't mean to do that. What can you do? All right, so avoid misinformation. So I've used this picture, which comes from a debate around the guidebook for great communities that was heard just over a year ago, where we heard, I won't go into details with this, but basically we were given this guideline that would help communities implement the policies in the municipal development plan. But then it came out that, what you can see down here, changes to existing density, height, setbacks, lot sizes and coverage, loss of green space, removal of mature trees, loss of community engagement and input. None of that is true. Now, somebody maybe will argue with me about that, but I'm telling you now, based on what I know, what I read in that document, none of this is true. Anything that came from this document was already contained in the municipal development plan, which is a statutory document. This was just a policy. This had no effect on anything the city could do. They created a menu for communities, and we were told that it was going, this is the one that really bugs me. This comes up every time we argue for more densities, the loss of green space, removal of mature trees. Well, hey, if you lose one tree in your neighborhood and we can't build a 4-story apartment building, you know what we do instead? We build Ricardo Ranch. And so that's why I want people to avoid misinformation, because this is fake environmental activism. This is doing nothing for the environment. What it's doing is it's forcing us to eat up greenfield, because the city is hearing from people saying they don't want development in the inner city. And that's a huge problem. And it came up in the missing middle debates that were also recently at city council, where we heard all of these people that were scared because of what they had been told, that suddenly there's going to be row houses and their single family home is going to be lost. Calgary has the most single family homes of any city in Canada. We are not losing single family homes anytime soon. I can guarantee you that. So every time we see this, we want to ensure, at least do some research. If somebody's telling you this plan is going to destroy your neighborhood, I would encourage you to look at what the city website says, because that is the truth. The city does not lie to us. I can tell you that right now. The city tells us the truth. There are good people working at the city that do good work, that have the community in mind. Why do we hire a whole department of city planners? Because they have been trained to plan cities. People on the internet have not been trained to plan cities. So listen to the city when these things come up. All right, finally, here's a list of some other things. So stay informed and advocate for density, alternative transportation, and the climate strategy. Contact the mayor and councilors. That's super easy to do. There's contact forms on all of their web pages through the city. You can even contact councilors that aren't in your ward. They will hear you. They don't necessarily have to listen to you, but if they see a whole bunch of people emailing them about this, they're going to pay attention. Submit to or speak at council meetings, also hugely important. If the city, again, if councilors are hearing the budget considerations for Ricardo Ranch and they hear 100 people say, I don't think this should be built, they might still approve it, but they're going to think twice next time they do that. And so that's really important. Volunteer with civic or conservation groups. So, all the groups I mentioned before: Alberta Wilderness Association, Calgary River Valleys, the Weaselhead Preservation Society, Kathleen's group, the people that are hosting this very event tonight, Calgary Climate Hub. Just even go to one of their events and see what's there. You're all here tonight, which is great. We're all having this conversation now. It can move things forward. Speak out and tell others whenever you can. So if somebody says, what is this Ricardo Ranch thing? Well, now you can tell them a little bit. If someone says, hey, did you know that they're going to be building a duplex beside us? I don't think we should be doing that. Well, tell them what the effects of that are. Say why you think that should be built. When somebody says the green line is a bad idea, well, tell them what is a worse idea than the green line. All of those things can make a difference. If you don't have time to do any of this, we always need money. Nobody is getting rich off of doing this stuff. So donate and then go out and explore as well. The only reason why I learned about this was because I saw the pictures on a map of what was being developed. And I thought, well, I think I know what this area is. And I went out and looked, and that was Ricardo Ranch. So go out and see for yourself what's being affected. Okay, so that was a little bit longer than 45 minutes, but I'm happy to stay here for questions and comments. I might rope some people in here against their will that are joining us tonight if I can't answer a question. There's my email right there. And thank you, of course, to Kathleen and everybody for hosting this and for hosting me. I'm really grateful to be able to have spoken to so many people about this. And maybe I'll just leave this on the screen for another 30 seconds if people wanted to jot down the email address as well. So that's it. Thank you, Kathleen.
Wow, Nathan. And yeah, we're happy to leave that up there for a little while so people have a chance to write that down. And being on Zoom, it's hard to applaud, but that was such a fantastic presentation. I learned a ton, and I'm sure that everybody else did here as well. And I could see the red highlights from down below in the chat. There's tons of chatter going on, lots of questions. We love questions. As I said to my dear friend, who's actually on the call here as well, a few of you are very dear friends, so not singling anybody out, but was pointing out any question that you have, they're welcome, because a lot of us are coming here today not knowing anything about this project. Maybe you don't know some of the terminology with the environment that was used, like riparian area, things like that. Please don't be afraid to ask anything that you're curious about, because that curiosity is what gets us interested and gets us excited about things. So please don't be shy about any of the questions that you have. And Nathan, I really thank you for putting so much effort into your presentation. I love it that we have all different styles of different communication that happen on our show on these events, and every one of them is fantastic. And I really enjoyed yours as well, because I really learned a lot. And I think that you summarize that process through the municipality in such a way that actually is a lot more understandable. It's very complex, and I don't think there's anything we can do to make it a whole lot less complex, but you made it fairly tangible that we could really visualize that and see where we fit into that. And just before we go on to Q&A, so I'll go through and I'll read some of the chat, but I just want to bring your attention to, and I don't want to distract at all from Save Ricardo Ranch. That's why we're here today. So as I mentioned though, we put on 5 sort of special event Wildlife Wednesdays over the last 5 weeks. This is the final one of the series. I'm a member of the Bird Friendly Calgary, and several of my colleagues are here as well. And when Calgary became certified as a bird friendly city a couple of years ago through Nature Canada, we had to apply for that with a matrix of different criteria that the city is doing already to protect nature. And there's a long list of things that we have to go through, and all of these different projects have an impact on a number of things. Like Nathan said a few times, everything is connected. And so through what we learned through Bird Friendly Calgary and hearing about some issues happening, some of the different developments occurring, as well as the work that we do through Calgary Urban Species Response Team, through supporting truth and reconciliation, looking at the lands that we are residing upon, and there's just so much to consider when we hear about something being developed. So very quickly, I don't do anything quickly, but I'll try to be quick. I just want to bring your attention to the 5 of them. So tonight we're focusing on Ricardo Ranch. This video is going to be up on YouTube by tomorrow morning. So I saw somebody noted that they were going to share it at school. That is so exciting. I love that. So we'll be up on YouTube. It'll be raw, uncut. I'm not an editor, so I apologize, but it'll be up there for you to see again if you'd like to, and please do share it. The other ones that we talked about, please take a look too at Save Nose Creek, which is another Calgary development. We had our friends from Save the Rosebud on. Rosebud, Alberta is not that far away from us, and we talk about urban sprawl and such. Rosebud is becoming closer and closer to Calgary all the time. And they've been working for a number of years to protect the Rosebud River Valley there as well. And a lot of things that you're hearing today from Nathaniel apply to Rosebud, Nose Creek, and other areas that right now need more public attention. That would include Save Confederation Creek. We had Simone Lee up last week. And finally, I'll just mention that if there's any birders here, which I know there are, you will be familiar with Frank Lake, which is just east of High River, which is just south of Calgary. And there is a major solar panel development going in there. And there's a lot of discussion about that as well. So there are 5 topics for you to be aware of: Save Nose Creek, Save the Rosebud, Save Confederation Creek, or Friends of Confederation Creek, the solar paddle development at High River by Frank Lake, and then tonight, Save Ricardo Ranch. Whew. So if you're not excited about getting involved in something in the area, there's lots of ideas. So I am going to go to the chat now. I'll see if I can find a couple of questions in there to ask. And Nathan, you said, did you want to bring in Anne and Bill with anything specific before we get into the conversation? I know you mentioned a couple of things there earlier.
I mean, I just know Anne and Bill, sorry, I didn't mean to throw you into the fire. I just saw I just saw that you were here, and you know, Calgary River Valleys is a group that is so intimately involved with these issues and has a lot of organizational knowledge. So I mean, I'm happy if you do want to invite either of you, just to if you're able to right now as well with your setup. If you wanted to add anything, I think that would be really valuable for the group as well. And if not, then you can pipe in on the questions as they come in too.
100%, and really glad that you're here. Thank you. I think it's really great to even have awareness of the different organizations that are in Calgary and the area. I saw an unmute happen.
Although I'm not sure if we can actually hear them. Uh-oh.
It's definitely unmuted, but maybe close. Do you need to be closer to a microphone, maybe?
Try that now. Can you hear it?
There you go. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for this tonight. This is much needed new start, I guess we'll call it. And Nathaniel, I'm impressed that you're able to compress so much into about an hour here. There's about 4 or 5 days of argument we could throw into the mix. And starting with the fact that I hope we don't just focus on the local urban government municipality, and as much as our long experience with living in Calgary, and we do have some wins. We have lots of struggles too, but it has been that the city of Calgary is inclined to live up to the minimum standards that we can somehow have built into the rule book. And most often the rule book starts with the province and also includes the federal government to a certain degree. So the standards that we have here for clean water is what is the minimum standard. We'll start at that point. And that minimum standard is sometimes determined by how much the people who live downstream of us are hurt. And that's just water. Wildlife is much larger. And when I say downstream, I don't mean just in terms physically, but in terms of time. Things have changed greatly in the years that I've lived here, over 60 years. So there is a need always to keep a foot in the provincial and federal camps as well. But most definitely the immediate recruitment, the sense of outrage that we always have to fight the, I would call it willful ignorance, because I know many developers, we've dealt with them much and often, too often in the past. Some of them have been friends, by the way. They know full well what those impacts are. The rule book has been set out to allow us to evolve at a faster rate than nature really wants us to go. And we are losing a lot of elements. In this particular case, and in Ricardo Ranch, we are fortuitous in having 2 endangered species. I'm using the term loosely because they actually have 2 different categories here. The great blue heron rookery that's there, and the bank swallows. And I thank you for the information on that 2.5 kilometer range for bank swallows. I wasn't aware it was that. But even the 1 kilometer range from a nesting site set out by Kosovic, the organization in Canada that actually sets the standard for these matters, gives us a phenomenal opportunity in a city like Calgary and along the river to really do something good in this place, I believe. And there are other species as well that are extirpated from the city, or almost there. We have meadowlarks, for instance, which used to pretty well define what prairie land was in the early years of Calgary. We're down to 2 nesting sites in the city right now, about 15 nests between. We have many other elements where this particular site, the opportunity now is here to find a way along that lifeline, the river, and all of the fortuitous elements that we haven't always had are in place. The question is whether or not we can have a cooperation from developers and all 3 levels of government to make it work. So this is a great piece of starting material. I hope that we're able to build on it. I'm hoping that there's some way for us to, and this is an old dream, about in the 90s, which was to bring Fish Creek Park out onto the river, and south and east, and carry through outside the city. We would have to do a better job than what's been done in Fish Creek Park in order to protect the 2 species that are there right now. And I'm all for that. It's an opportunity again. And it isn't just this particular site, but also there's a few islands upstream. There are de facto crown lands or near crown lands, we'll call them that, in as much as they're not developable, will either accrue to the city or the province one way or another over time. All those leading from the mouth of Fish Creek as it runs into the river. So I'm putting a bigger dream for this particular site on the table, and hoping that it cuts into Nathaniel's overall consideration, and I do agree with him. I live closer to West Nose Creek, and I have an affinity for that creek, and we have Indian plans going back 40 years trying to protect it as well.
Wow.
So thank you for this tonight. I'm hoping we can build on a coalition of sorts where we're able to do a better job in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for sharing that really important information, for all the work that you're doing and your team is doing as well. That's fantastic. I think you mentioned we were focusing a little bit on the municipal government, of course, and then there is the provincial and then the federal. Is there involvement right now with the provincial or federal government at all in terms of the species at risk here? How does that work into these pieces?
So it's my understanding that the federal government is not involved yet. There is sort of there's awareness of the bank swallows, and there are some legal complexities about the application of the Species at Risk Act. So it's difficult to say whether this would ever be considered critical habitat, which is a requirement under that act to gauge its protections. But it's something that we have in the works to bring forward an application that it be considered, because part of the recovery strategy states that the amount of critical habitat identified is not sufficient for the, and I won't use the correct wording, sorry, there's so much legal jargon in these things, but the continued recovery and survival of the species is roughly what it says. And so there is room for the addition of more critical habitat as far as that. And that's the only, that's the only, and I see a comment coming in here. So I'm going to put the bank swallows into a little bit of context. So no, the bank swallows are not mentioned on anything because the recovery strategy was only released in 2021, the final recovery strategy. That is the thing that sort of enacts the Species at Risk Act to say, now we have to consider these things. This was all being engaged way before 2021. And so we won't see the bank swallows really on here because these colonies weren't necessarily on anybody's radar. And now you ask, well, why are the herons mentioned on there? Well, heron rookeries are much more visible than bank swallow colonies, we'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Is what I would guess is why, and because of the work of Calgary River Valleys too, this was a well-known place, and so it was something that was brought to attention early on. Now that bank swallows are listed here, I think we can expect that maybe some more will be done. I mean, I'll certainly be taking some steps to take action on that.
So you can actually apply to have that reviewed as critical habitat. Is that right?
There is a process for that. And it's a process that there are others that I am speaking to that will hopefully help to see what we can do with that.
Fantastic. And Bill, did you want to add something to that?
Well, I can tell you that the developers making their proposals first for the area structure plan and then later for area development plans and outline plans, the various stages of planning and development in the city, have hired their own specialists to come in and make assessments and recommendations along the way. Our experience with it is that the development community is well versed in how to handle those matters, how to negotiate those matters. And they have ultimate professionals, I'm going to call them that. Sometimes we call them gunslingers, who spend their lives working for developers and putting a good picture on whatever will develop out of whatever is done. And I think all of us are aware that almost every outlying greenfield type community that is built sells itself on the kind of wildlife around it. And on wetlands, which are most often man-made wetlands or heavily disturbed just by the nature of the development that goes in. And the earlier figures Nathaniel was able to get his hands on, indicating that 80% of wetlands within the developed areas are destroyed beyond what it is actually 90%. That's what we have used over the years.
Versus I think 67 in all of Alberta.
Alberta has two.
So, you know, we're winning.
Well, that's not in Calgary. In Calgary, we're at beyond the 90%.
Yeah, 90%. Yeah,
that's right. When you look at the developed areas of the province actually has a green area and a developed area. And in the developed area, yes, it's probably in the vicinity of 75 to 80% of the wetlands are heavily we don't call it destroyed, but they're modified to the point where their capacity is far different. And of course, they've been given different things to do. Those wetlands also exist for our purposes. And by the way, the just for the wording, and because it actually fits into a piece of music someplace, Nate, the great blue heron fall into that category that we call charismatic macro species. And the bank swallows don't quite make it, you know. So
right.
I think if we're going to expand this, we may have to use every tool that's in the box, and that's one of them.
Well, and I think that the bank swallows keeps coming up on different speakers that we have coming on. I can't list off exactly which ones they apply to, but I think that if we're looking at all these different developments, you know, adding them all up and the sum of impact of all of this loss is, you know, something to really consider. I think one thing last week that was Simone had mentioned from Friends of Confederation Creek is the language that's used sometimes to be mindful of what this means, because she said oftentimes it'll be a discussion about stormwater, when that's actually fresh water, it's river water, it's creek water. It's trying, I don't know if it's deliberate or not, but it makes it sound unnatural. So it kind of is a distraction from the actual naturalness of something that might be there that's being disturbed. And I think sometimes we hear about these more wild grasslands as being green areas, which sounds like lawn, and it doesn't sound as biodiverse as it is. So I think that maybe, I'm not sure if that's applicable here, but I think just to be mindful when you hear different language to maybe look a little bit about, well, wait, what are they actually describing here? Because I think a couple of things you mentioned there, Bill, brought that to mind as well, about the importance of the nature that is in these areas.
I'll add to that too, that, yeah, I agree that bureaucratic language is by necessity quite neutral a lot of the time. So
right.
When you think of green field, we don't think, oh yeah, what is that? Green field. Okay, well, it's a field of green. But it's not, right? Like green field, there's so much that fits into what that means for everything. And so that's what, I would encourage people, and I'm sure everybody else here would as well, to go out and explore these areas and really learn about what they are. And as I'm saying this, I'm actually trying to bring out a flood map here.
That'd be amazing if you bring up a flood map. And I'm seeing a few people here commenting that I think they'd like to get an idea of where Ricardo Ranch is with some of the surrounding communities. While you bring that up, can I throw another question at you that we have not touched upon, I don't think?
Yeah.
With respect to historical artifacts, provincial artifacts, indigenous, sacred lands and spaces, and that, that is such an important consideration. And I'm just wondering, where does that fit into this? And do we know if there has been proper involvement with local indigenous communities, each of them that might be
So
affected?
I know from speaking to the developers, they've gone through some of those discussions. Historical artifacts are something that is being discussed in this area as well. Mm-hmm. I, personally have not focused on much on that, as much on that, because it's not an area that I am overly familiar with. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I know that factors into the city's considerations. It forms a big part of the area structure plan as well. They talk about integrating different all different aspects of Indigenous culture into the way that it's built, and also preserving, say, like the Ricardo Ranch, the house itself that's still there, the historical ranch house too. So those are all part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And however, it's not about, my impression is it's not about preserving, it's about integrating into the area, is really, which is coincidentally the same discussion about a lot of the natural area. It's about preservation as part of integration, so that the community can use it, which has, like we discussed earlier, some positive and negative outcomes. I did see another question that I might actually address is the whole development that is an issue, or just neighborhood 4 within the development? So yeah, that's a good question, because it is primarily neighborhood 4, and that is a huge concern, although, ideally none of this would be built, but we have to be realistic, because it's gotten this far in the process. Mm-hmm. And in reality, there's the escarpment, and there's the area below the escarpment. Above the escarpment, personally, I don't think it's worth our time and energy to prevent that. However, the real thing that we need to protect is neighborhood 4, and where the changes need to happen. And as I'm talking about this, I'm trying to scroll through the area structure plan to find neighborhood 4, so you can have an idea. There's some really helpful maps in here, and area structure plans are really accessible. So if you just search for, a new development, okay, I found it finally. Okay, I will share my screen again. Awesome. Here. so you can look through the area structure plans, but you can see on my screen here, we have the different neighborhoods. So the escarpment line is really, if you can see my cursor moving, kind of roughly along here. And so neighborhood 4 is the one that is the primary concern, because it is the one that is directly up against what will remain as natural area and environmental reserve within the city. And so I did see somebody as well post the definition of environmental reserve from the Municipal Government Act. So environmental reserve, again, bureaucratic language, it means a few different things. And it includes mostly areas that from my reading, the way that I interpret this section is that environmental reserve is really considering safety. And so we set off environmental reserve because these areas really are not appropriate for use because of, you know, their ravines, their coulees, their wetlands, they're these kinds of things. However, there is an environmental aspect to them as well, that we also look at these environmental reserve to say, well, this is an important area for these reasons. So there's a couple different things that go into that. So we can see on the map, so actually this might be good for everybody if people are interested. This is what an area structure plan looks like. So it's a document that the city releases. It's, again, a very broad overview. Sorry for all the scrolling, but here we have Ricardo Ranch. And so this is when we talk about the farmhouse, this is the historic farmhouse, and this is where development will occur, partly here. Now, this is far above the river. This is not a flood risk right here at all. And so when you go through here, it gives you some basic information about what is going to be built. So this area, so you can see the escarpment along here. So development will occur in the area directly below the escarpment. That's where it's proposed to be built. And so then we have all of our different summaries. It gives you a history of the area. It tells you where it's going to be built. It's, again, very high level stuff. But now here we have a really interesting map, and the city maps these things out. So we have our slopes. So again, you can see that the escarpment here, we have areas within there where Calgary River Valley's pointed out the natural springs that run through there that help feed the wetlands that initially were going to be piped, but good news that I heard in my meeting with the developers was that there's no longer plans to pipe the springs coming down from there. So that is one positive step that has been taken. Now, whether that actually happens, we'll see. So then it goes through sort of the natural features of the area. And then speaking of historical resources, you know, it maps out an area where those could be found, and how when was the house built, that will be contained within the area structure plan. I think it was around 1880 from what I remember is when the house was built. And then it tells you what they imagine for the area and all the different things for housing. So this is an area structure plan. It's got some maps, but it tells you 635 hectares. I was wrong. Up to 20,000 people was initially what was outlined for this. 1,300 jobs, 6,500 units. So, you know, something that's also useful when you look at these is it lists all the maps. So this might actually be helpful. So neighborhood 4 is not going into this area along here. So you see this line right here, sort of a natural line forming. I can zoom in on this a little bit, but neighborhood 4 is proposed to be built within kind of this area right here. So then if I go to the flood map, we can see that that area was not flooded, even from this map as well. It was not covered by water during those floods where neighborhood 4 is proposed to be built. Now, parts of it will be right up against the floodwaters. And here's the other problem with the development is that there is going to be 2 stories of fill put into up to 2 stories potentially. I think it was in Cranston, I believe it was, I shouldn't say the number because I don't know exactly, but there was meters of fill put in. And if you go to Cranston and then you look at Ricardo Ranch, you can see the difference. The lower part of Cranston is higher than it ever was, because that is our solution to building in flood fringe. And so the definition of flood fringe is a 1 in 100 flood event. So the area that's being developed is in the flood fringe area. And as part of the mitigation, they're going to fill in the areas abutting it and raise up the neighborhood so that it is at a lower risk of flooding. And that includes raising up furnaces in the basement, and all those kinds of things. So they know this, and they're putting in what's needed to mitigate this. But then again, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it worth this much effort to build neighborhood for example, when we're destroying so much in the process and spending so much money to build it up? And again, when we go back to affordability, I think it's a legitimate question that can be asked is, if this much work is going into building this neighborhood and this much money, what is the return on investment? Well, that means that the houses are going to have to be really expensive to justify this kind of engineering down here, rather than just, having the land have its inherent value. We're building up and we're putting in a bunch of money to re-engineer an entire ecosystem to put houses down there, which, given how much space we have in Calgary, again, this is my opinion. It's I just don't see the logic in that. Now, are people's houses going to flood immediately? Probably not, because of what they're doing here, right? But we know what's happening with climate change. And so we have natural springs above them. We have an escarpment. You have a river right beside you that's going to flood more and more often. And you have this area that was at one point a wetland, and that has been, some overland flooding for sure comes up very close to it. So again, we look at this flood map and then we bring back up where there's going to be the neighborhood. Would I buy a house down here? Maybe if I could afford a $1.5 million house, I'd be like, fine, I'll just buy a different house. But, I personally wouldn't buy a house down here. Knowing what we all know about what happened in 2013, and given the effects of climate change, like, something that I keep coming back to when I think about this and think about submitting to council is the city is a fiduciary towards all of us. Our councillors are our fiduciaries. We vote them in there to care for us, and the Municipal Government Act itself says that the city has certain responsibilities. So do our rules say that we can build down here? Yes, they do. Are we following all of the laws? More or less, yes, we are. Is it the responsible choice? Is it the city actually taking care of us in the way that it should? Again, my argument is no, it's not. And that's what I plan to keep telling them along the way.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that one thing too, in terms of, we're talking about if you talk to your city councilor or other representative, don't feel like you have to know all the facts when you go to them. Feel free to take your questions to them and ask that they explain. And if they don't know, that they find out and really explain it to you. Like my question about Indigenous peoples and their involvement. That's a fair question to ask. And sometimes your questions too can prompt their interest in looking further into things as well. So don't feel like you have to be the expert of things to take your questions forward, and your request for more information. So I was going to say at the bottom, there are reactions. You can raise a hand if you'd like to. Feel free to unmute and ask your question. And Nathaniel, you've been really good about catching questions as they go by there. I'm going to scroll up to when you were speaking and see if I can spot a few. Feel free to chat and kill time while I look up here. I'll just hum. It was noted that the city does also have a riparian action program and a riparian strategy. Thanks, Catherine, for mentioning that. For
And if
those
anybody, if anybody wants any of those documents, I have collected all of them. And I'm sure Calgary River Valleys has as well. I'll gladly send them to you.
Terrific. And actually, Marissa, who's on the call right now, does up a beautiful, like a summary of our call to date. And she'll send it to you, Nathan, for you to review it. And oftentimes, well, she'll always include the resources that are mentioned. Sounds like we've got quite a list tonight, so they might not all be there. But, and if you do see a link in the chat and you're like, oh, I want to see that later, click on it, open it in a browser so you don't lose it, because as soon as you close the browser from Zoom, it'll be gone. And just a comment here from Deborah that there's 10,000 people and their cats and dogs, and this actually ties into the bird-friendly city certification as well. Is we have to speak every year about how we're doing on all the different rubric points for our certification, and those do include things like the control of cats and dogs. Are dogs being allowed in off-leash areas or on-leash areas? Off leash? Are they disturbing natural areas? So what you were saying earlier, and I love animals too. I have my house is full of rescued animals through ARCs and love them all. But that is really important, that creep through on that setback as to when people are going to go exploring with their animals. Did you spot any more questions while I'm is there a way to walk from the bus to Ricardo Ranch area? That's a really great question. So if somebody did want to go down either on their own or with their leashed dog, how would a person get there to go and check it out?
Okay, I can hold on, I'll pull up Google Maps and I'll show you, because it's
Sweet.
confusing.
Okay, I think that'd be great.
There's some obstacles as well. So I'll try to tell you the best way I can to access it. And if you're afraid of trespassing, you're not in risk of trespassing, because it's very clear what you can access and what you can't. Okay. So you're not going to be messing anything up if you go down there at this point. People were driving their vehicles in there for some time, so you can't do any worse than that. Okay. So this is Ricardo Ranch right here, if everybody can see that, across from Policeman's Flats, actually, if that's a familiar point for you. But you can see this this canal of sorts. I believe parts of it were actually constructed at certain times. But this whole area, you can kind of walk on either side of this water and still remain out of trespassing range. Now there's a barbed wire fence about right here underneath the bridge that you'll pass, but you can go through that. The dog walkers, it was put up, so there was an error made in right before our first walk about where this fence and no trespassing signs were put up. The dog walkers have corrected that in the meantime by cutting the barbed wire fence down, or somebody did anyways. The next time I came after it, it was gone. So you can access, and there's another fence that goes along here, another barbed wire fence. I mean, don't climb over that, but everywhere else you can access. So the way that you access it is you want to come, and this is also confusing because even though this says Cranston Gate, the exit you want to take is 212th Ave Southeast, and you want to get down to Cranbrook Gardens Southeast. Okay, so I'm going to put a pin right here. And again, if you do want to get here, anyways, right on this corner. Okay, so you can walk around here. There's houses being built here now as part of Cranston, but you can go around this way and it's all publicly accessible down to the bow, and you go under the bridge at Deerfoot, and then you get in through this way. Don't try to access it from this other side down up here, because that's provincial land. That's sort of the infrastructure throughway or whatever they call it along Deerfoot, and it's difficult. It's a big hill. This is the easiest way down here. And so whatever bus route, if you want to take the bus that you map out, I would suggest maybe plugging in Cranston Avenue or something like that. This is down in the valley, and Cranston Avenue is sort of the main road that takes you through there. And if you can get transit access to Cranston Avenue, then it's not a super long walk. I mean, prepare for a couple hours for sure, but you can go down and explore getting through that way. So,
and Darren mentions that might be this number 79 bus. So always double check before you go, but yeah, sounds like it's the number 79, which I used to take in Oak Ridge. So I guess they've extended the line since the 80s.
And I see Ann and Bill have their hand up.
Ah, yes.
Yes, just a couple of things here. First of all, because it's the topic of the moment, how to get there. I have a really grave concern that we have two species down there that are averse to, especially dogs, but also people. And so I don't want people going down, wandering around until it's been fully scoped out and turned into some kind of wildlife refuge. Our biggest excuse for being able to save these lands are those two sets of nesting sites. And if you disturb them, they will go. They won't be there anymore. Yeah. That will just be playing into the hands of whoever wants to use those lands for other purposes. And so please don't do that. And I don't know how to get the word out, or if it would be possible to have, we're going to be talking to the developers sometime in the near future. If they would come to an agreement with the city, maybe the province too, because some of those lands still have some provincial jurisdiction on them, maybe they could be fenced off and turned into a preserve in the meantime, because I don't want this to happen. Our publicizing this can actually be harmful even to our own cause, never mind the fact that the biodiversity is going to be very adversely affected. And if these developers want to do what I consider to be the right thing, which is to concentrate their development outside of the river valley. The river valleys are actually the lifeline for what biodiversity means in the developed world now. That's what we have to protect by and large. So here we are, and we're discussing about how do we raise the density internally. And I'm saying what we're doing to the Bow River downtown to the point where it's impassable and we're losing species yearly. And so we have to focus our area, our actions outside of this kind of an area, but this we cannot afford to lose. That's my position on it. Furthermore, the city has just embarked on a new way of increasing density in the inner city. I live in the inner city. It used to be called the near inner city. Now it's called the inner city. And they're filling in spaces. Those inner city areas and near inner city areas need their open spaces as well, particularly those which are home to the various water courses that still exist. So we have Confederation Creek and we have Fish Creek. We have other small streams from place to place and a few remaining wetlands and a few uplands too, which are important. And they need connectivity. So it takes a special kind of planning, which isn't always available in the process that we have now in place. And I think we have to work pretty hard at doing that. Secondly, and just as important, when we're talking about we're going to stop the city from developing in this kind of an area, and I'm talking about the uplands here now, we're talking about actually driving those developers and people into what used to be hamlets when I came to Calgary. And now they are small cities all the way around us. Almost every one of them straddles a water course. They all do the same kind of thing. So I think we have to get out of our NIMBYism. There is a form of NIMBYism here, and find a way to ensure that these new developments that are going to go in are going to be just as dense as we have, as what is being proposed in the inner city right now. And that's not happening. Those developers want to have those high-end homes, those single families on acre lots and whatnot. They're a huge part of what they sell. And this is the type of area where it happens. So there's a lot of work to be done. The basic bottom line is, yes, we have to protect the land along the river for sure. And I really do appreciate the work you've done here tonight, Nathaniel, all that you've done up till now. I hope we're able to expand upon that. But all of those other things are a part of the package, and Calgary isn't going to stop growing. We don't have latest figures that I know of in terms of inventory of land to be developed. That's green space, never mind redeveloping inner space. It's not 5 years, Nate. It's between 15 and 28 years, depending on how the demographics grow here. And that's the general long term. We have already that amount in stream. But these three developments that are actually proposed here will probably take as much as 15 years to build out. And the developers think that far ahead. They own land all the way around Calgary.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about Rosebud too, with the development that's looking there for a racetrack and a big entertainment center, and also year-round condos and everything else like that, right in the Badlands at that river valley. And that's the thing too, is it seems to be that's just the start. So you see that piece and the precedent to set, then it's there, and then where does it expand after that initial build? So that's a really good point. And I think too, I really appreciate what you were saying as well, because I know I was thinking, oh yeah, it is important, like you're saying, Nathaniel, to see these places and such. A few times I've thought, and this came back to mind from what you were saying, if you love it enough to maybe not go there. That's a really good point, because Nathan has shared some amazing photography from there, and other people have as well. So that's a really good point about maybe there's times when it's like, oh, you know what, I really do care about that area, so maybe I'm not going to actually go see it myself and explore online what you can. So thank you for bringing up the mindfulness of that. I do appreciate that.
You can definitely look from Policeman's Flats with your binoculars. It's across the river. You should be able to see the heron rookery quite well. Maybe not the bank swallows.
Right.
But there's another dimension to it, which is to talk to the architects and ask them to build cities that are more livable, so that we don't drive those who can afford it into this kind of an area.
That's a very good point. A very good point indeed. Oh, that's great. And thank you for continuing to share. I think that's really important. Nathan, did you have anything else you want to say about that?
Oh, I totally agree. Responsible, we all have to be responsible as well. And so, you know, if you do, despite what Bill has said, if you do feel compelled to visit it, which I would agree with Bill that we shouldn't be all flooding into this area. That yeah, that like they suggested, there are ways you can do so without disturbing what's there.
And it was nice when you were, you know, helping with that too, because then you would be there to ensure people are staying in areas that aren't too sensitive and such as well. So
and to, you know, to be clear, we did not as a group go deep into the area. We went essentially maybe a few hundred meters past the bridge and stopped and then came back. And so that's really, as Bill was saying, that's how the area should be treated, with that kind of respect.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that clarification. It's really okay. So question here: who pays for insurance claims? The lower benchlands, flatlands adjacent to the river below the escarpment are all within the flood zone, expected to flood every 10 years. Who pays for the insurance claims? All Albertans do. So the developers, I guess it's more of a comment than a question. The developer walks away with their profit and none of the liability, I suppose. So that is something you touched on too about forward thinking in terms of climate change. What's going to be happening now is, unfortunately, we see what's happening with climate change and the effect on waters.
And we can actually see it happening in the way that, you know, our engineering knowledge keeps getting better, but Douglasdale, the slope along there where there's pathways, is now all collapsing.
Really?
It's going to cost us about $50 million from what I've heard to repair that. And that's now on the public purse. So,
Oh.
and we can even see actually as well, another good example is the construction of the Springbank Dam that is meant to prevent flooding, $1 billion, because we've decided to build in the floodways. So it's everything has a cost, a long ways away from just now.
Yeah, that's for sure. So
Can I just,
oh yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me, Kathleen.
Yeah.
It's just raised a sore point with us, and we've been involved somewhat with the Springbank Reservoir, which we're paying for. The price on the table is $560 million, and we're all paying for that in order to accommodate the people downstream. And at the same time, we're changing the wildlife corridor, the riparian zone, the health of the river, all of those other things, right? Well, for what it's worth, and you should probably be more aware of this, it hasn't been heavily publicized, but there's a new dam site being proposed between Calgary and Cochrane.
Really?
Yes, and I'm guessing, looking at the specs that I've just seen, there were 3 sites. One of them went as far as the stoningation, probably isn't going to get off the ground. One of them deals with the ghost dam and raising the level, but the main one, and it seems to be the one that's going to go, will be the one between Cochrane and Calgary. I'm guessing the price tag in the $2 to $3 billion range, and you and I will be asked to pay for that. I at one time, when I was a student, lived along Bow Crescent, right on the river, and I'd visit the site from time to time, and there are big signs up posing the flood berm that the city is proposing for the edge of the river there to protect the community of Bowness. Mm-hmm. It also gets flooded out from time to time. And those people are opposed to it on the basis of the fact that you and I will build a dam upstream and reduce.
Really?
Yes, it's very definite. Yes. You can drive down Bow Crescent. There's still the odd sign up. They've been up for the last 2 years. I've seen the preliminary plans on the table already. And so it's one of those things we should all sit down and talk about. But what that will do, this is a major tributary to the Saskatchewan River system. And as we continually do this, there's the Old Man Dam down south. There's this one here. We have some up by Red Deer. Anyway, by the time you put them all together, the wildlife corridors, the lifeline actually of the prairies is being narrowed continually and controlled. I have to say, and in fairness, that if the dam is built upstream of Calgary on the Bow, it should. If it doesn't, I'd be terribly disappointed, include a water reservoir, because we're probably going to need that in Calgary if we continue to grow here. Nevertheless, the Springbank Dam, we have already written to Natural Resources Conservation Board, the Federal Impact Assessment Review Board, and being told in spades that the Springbank Dam will not be used as a reservoir for Calgary. It's only there just to protect the people who live downstream. That's it. And on top of that, it removes several thousand acres from the normal ranching and farming processes that have been there for many years, and their natural contributions as well. It's not being made into a big bathtub. So all of those things happen in our society. We're up against a movement probably only rivaled by the way the Egyptians looked after the Nile back in their days, and you will be losing all that natural viability through this kind of a process. So I'm hoping that there'll be enough coming together to start respecting those things once again.
So did I understand correctly that there are decisions being made downstream, downriver, future developments, was decisions being made on that based upon the expectation that the not yet approved dam will be built?
Those developers are very intelligent people.
So there's an expectation that the developments downstream will be going in contingent on the dam being built, and then that almost makes it a requirement that that dam be built.
You're getting
Is
there.
that right?
So the forces that are in play are larger than you can see on the surface, and it's not just happening here. If you want to go up to Fort McMurray, you'll find the Clearwater River has got a new subdivision plan right along the banks of the Clearwater River. So we think of that in terms of forest fires up there, but they're not thinking in terms of the fact that every 30 to 50 years that river floods too and takes it out, and you and I pay for their development again. I have neighbors to the east of me who got hailed out last year. I think most of you are aware of that. The roof's got it, siding has come off it. There have not been enough repair people to finish the job. Hundreds of those sites are still left unrepaired. The government did not step in to help those people with that natural disaster that happened to them. People live along rivers, and we can have it made. And anyway, I don't want to be putting a damper on what we're doing here and discourage anybody. You have to redouble what you're doing and understand that they're not respecting what we stand for. If that game plan is already in place, you have to know what you're up against.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing that. Very quick shout out to Lindsay in Cranston. She's going to watch the video with her students there. So hi to her class. Great to have them here watching eventually when you see this video. I'm just going to, I see a bunch of new questions coming in, I think at the bottom there. And again, feel free to put your hand up or just unmute and start speaking. Not a problem. There's a lot to get through down here. There's a comment about if there was an EA, so environmental assessment, wouldn't there have been public consultation period for all of our questions to be publicly answered and the EA posted, or is it too small of a project to follow provincial EA steps?
That, from my understanding, will come after it goes through the Calgary Planning Commission. Then it goes to council with all the land use plans, and all of those reports will become available.
Okay, a preliminary has already been done. That's the Ricardo Ranch area structure plan. But when we get down to the area development plans, they go through that exercise again. Yes. And the detail is supposed to be more detailed, but if it's missed in the first go around, and a lot of that did happen, Ricardo Ranch has already had its overview area structure plan approval.
And so that's something that's important for everybody to pay attention to, because that does have to go to council once that goes through those stages, and there's public commentary on those things.
So how much of the different stages has the effect of, well, the stage before approved it, so they approved it, so it's probably fine, we'll just get it through a cursory review, there's not much we can do now because the last stage approved it. How much of that does that happen with a project like this?
I mean, you're literally almost verbatim saying what was said at the removal of the GMO overlays, and in committee as well. It was even in some instances saying, well, the last council thought this was a good idea, so why should we disagree with them? And so that's a little bit of a disservice. At the GMO council meeting, there were some tough questions asked by some councillors. But some of those councillors asking the tough questions ultimately still voted to remove the GMOs.
And sorry, what's the GMO again?
The growth management overlays.
Growth management overlay, okay.
That sort of basically just releases the project for development to occur. So, some of them, councillor, the Courtneys, Penner and well, Councillor Walcott wasn't there, but Councillor Penner had some pointed questions about, you know, how we got to this point.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you know, it was, what was the phone number? Anyways, there was only 3 opposed. I think it was 11 to, no, I'm wrong.
Wow.
There were 3 opposed to the removal of the growth management overlays. And the rest were in favor of removing them. So,
and then the next stages after that then are weakened due to the fact that that's been removed now.
Yeah.
The
and
next
so
one's
the next one, the next big opportunity is November 4th with the budget hearings. Now, again, it was approved at committee. The business cases were approved at committee. So for all intents and purposes, it's going to be approved at budget. And then, but again, it helps because there's still further stages after that. If it's on council's radar, along every step of the way, then they're going to be thinking about it before the vote. And so at every, like in the land use planning stage where we could potentially have an effect on things, if they've heard opposition leading all the way up to that, then it might be when it comes down to the focus on individual neighborhoods that we could make a difference.
So there's still hope. I think that's a really important point, is sometimes it feels like, well, there's nothing I can do. I would love to hear from both of you and from Calgary River Valley's team there, that there is hope and there's a point to it. If you can speak out, if you can share on social media, all those things, that a person can make a difference, right?
Council does what the public asks them to do a lot of the time, right?
Right.
And if they don't hear from us, or they're only hearing, and developers are the public. So if they're only hearing from one side, like I said about when it came to the guidebook, when it came to misinformation, if you listen to these council meetings, it's mostly, you know, people opposed to density that speak up, or when it comes to approving communities, nobody's there to speak against it. So it matters for you to say these things, and you don't even have to speak. You can send letters beforehand. You can send letters to each of the individual ones. That we're only going to change things if there's an appetite to do it. And council's not psychic. So
right.
they need to hear that we don't want it.
Yeah.
Well said, Nate.
Yeah, but I think there is hope to make some changes. I think Nate's right that this will be approved in the budget process, but there's still an opportunity to sort of change, you know, maybe eliminate neighborhood 4 or area 4 out of that Ricardo Ranch piece and do a better job of protecting, especially that crucial habitat that's further down, closer to the river. That's I think probably where we're likely to have the most impact. I think the chances of protecting the entire grasslands up on the top of the escarpments that are closer to the South Health Campus, I think probably that will be developed. But yeah, I think if we focused our efforts on protecting the escarpment area and protecting the lower benchlands. I mean, the lower benchlands, nothing should be built in there. I think that each of the developers that owns the 2 parts where the heron rookery are, one of them has basically proposed to make it entirely parkland or open space. The other one has proposed to make it partly open space, but partly development within the 1 in whatever it was, 1 in 10 or 1 in 10 flood zone. I'm like, that it makes no sense. I don't know if they're just counting on by the time it gets built there that there will be an upstream dam that they think will protect them, but that's not supposed to be how it's supposed to work. You're not meant to be able to say, well, you know, we're going to pursue this. You're not supposed to be able to lessen your flood risk by some, you know, the dam could fail, right? The dam could be overtopped, and then those people are in harm's way in a hurry. So I don't know. That's my understanding from talking to other people who are more expert than me. But yeah, you know, whether they, like Nate says, whether they are always obeying the rules that are actually in place, that's not always the case. But yeah, there's an opportunity to talk about these different issues and how, you know, the council has a chance to do the right thing here and to obey their own policies, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think that if there is the option of turning any of that into sanctuary, I think that you know, it's really becomes important too when you're talking about pathways of a park, that you start talking about too the impact of dogs, dogs off leash, even people and bicycles and wandering, and that kind of thing. It goes the impact, it goes a lot further than where the houses end. So all of that's really important. So the point is, do not give up. There is hope, and yeah, while it's still there, yeah, just keep expressing, you know, your concerns. If you have concerns, express them for sure.
And there's always a chance that you could make Calgary make the news for the right reasons. So,
I mean, definitely, as far as I understand, there's been quite a few issues. Even though Cranston was built to this higher level, they engineered it to be above where they thought it was at risk. There's still flooding issues in there. We've heard from a number of residents in that area that talk about their basements flooding all the time. So it's still, that area is still at risk, even though they think they've engineered it to be safe, but it still really isn't.
and for what it's worth, the big flood that we think of as being the flood of all floods in 2013 only reached something below 1 in 70 actually on the bow. On the elbow was as high as 1 in 165, and therefore we had a different kind of damage. But on the bow it was only, I've heard as low as 1 in 59 and as high as 1 in 65. So when Bill says that, he's talking about the, you know, flood risk of one in every 59 years, but that's kind of a false metric. It's really the flow rate. That's the usual flow rate every 59 years. But that is changing over time with climate change, so that, you know, that will turn into a risk. The same amount of flow will be facing that risk maybe every 25 years, every whatever, 15 years. So the risk is increasing. The projections are, the modeling that even the province has been doing is showing that we are going to get, like most places we're seeing around the world, we're going to get more intense rainstorms with a lot more water all at once. Yeah. And all these hard surfaces, like Nate was mentioning before, every hard surface is just shunting that water off into the stormwater pipe and then just sending it like a gusher into the rivers. So yeah.
Even the permafrost and, you know, in Canada is at risk right now too. So there's all these different things that are going to be adding on to things. A couple of comments were made earlier on about the herons and the swallows and their particular mention within the documentation that was submitted and the impact of that. And I think you might have commented on that. That's at the next stage, is it, that we talk more about that, or is that an oversight in the past documentation that was put forward on the plans?
We, Calgary River Valleys, as we had information on the heron rookery, and therefore earlier this year we did put in a letter on the growth management plan that included that comment. Last year, over a year ago, we put in a letter actually about our concern about building within the 1 in 100 floodplain. And we have another one coming in the near future here, which will deal with one of these areas coming up for consideration by Planning Commission. It's called, which one is it? The one in the middle.
Logan Landing.
Yeah, Logan Landing it's called. Last year we did Seton Ridge, Logan Landing, and then we have a really nifty name in here.
The new one, Nostalgia.
Oh, Nostalgia. I don't know how that came about, but anyway, those are the three major subdivisions going into the Ricardo Ranch area structure plan area.
Okay.
And so we have already put some of that information formally on the table. My understanding on at least the people who sit on planning commission and some of the standing policy committees, they're well aware of what we're talking about. And the political dynamic cuts in. And in Calgary, that means we have a battle ahead of us. Yes. We do have advantages, as Nathaniel has pointed out. Those two species of interest give us a leg up that we don't normally have. We're late comers. Had we been doing this 50, 60 years ago, we would have had more of those. But right now, we at least have those two species to back us up. Perhaps if we go looking a little further, we might find some near and endearing slugs or minnows or something like that, which are not the kind that are normally counted by the public. They're not, don't have that magic spark, but we do have those two species and they are important. They will give us a leg up when we go to negotiate. We may find them, the developers may.
I think that one thing too, community science is really important, and you never know how these things might be used, but if you happen to have already been down there, so I'm not encouraging people to go again, but if you have, like Nathaniel, the people that went with you on your walks, anybody who's been down there, Annabelle, if you've been down, you've got pictures on your phone, and maybe you've already done this, but anything that people can actually upload into iNaturalist to and tag it to that area, make sure it's an accurate depiction of where you saw the wildlife or the plants, the tiny slug to the swallow to the herons, and put that right into iNaturalist, because then that actually, all of us together, you can grow then that amount of information that is actually available to you and to anybody to be able to pull a report out and looking at that, because your peers will actually look at your pictures and verify the pictures that, oh yeah, that's a great blue heron. And if you have enough people that will click on it to agree that you've identified the species correctly, and if you don't know what the species is, it actually does an automated identification to start you out. It might be broad, but once you've got what's called it's called research grade on the iNaturalist app, and there's been a few articles recently where some pretty interesting things have come from that app being used, and any of us have access to it. If you've got an iPhone or a smartphone, or even on your laptop, you can use that.
Yeah, and just on that point, you can also, like, let's say you're over at Policeman's Flats and you have a long lens, you can get a picture and all you can see is the heron nests. You don't see any actual herons. You can post the nests picture to iNaturalist and say that it's, heron habitat and identify it as a heron. I saw a picture from one of the guys who I follow on iNaturalist, who's a research grade guy, and he posted a picture of a tree that had been chewed by a beaver, and he tagged it as American beaver. But yeah, it was just what the evidence that the beaver had been there recently, because it was a recent gnawing, and it was impressive. It was a big tree that beaver was going for.
Pretty big. They are very, very efficient, and that's really interesting. Well, there was one posting on iNaturalist that caused actually a negative issue down in the States. That I guess it was a student who just on a lark posted an insect onto iNaturalist where it was actually a very concerning invasive species that actually wasn't there, and triggered the federal government getting involved. They sent inspectors to the area to find this pest and decide, and to do trapping and everything and it turned out that they were on a lark putting that on iNaturalist. So, but the point of it being, it captured a ton of attention and fast, like to the federal level down in the States as a reaction to it. And they were going on that information as being trustworthy. So you just never know, like each of us in our little ways can try to contribute this information.
But if the trolls take over the information load, we're going to get the boy that called wolf syndrome, and it's already happened in Canada and other issues. So yeah, I hope that can happen here.
No, and I think that there was actually following that was a lot of criticism and a lot of discussion on the site that I saw, where everybody's like, please don't do this. And then professors were saying, this is why I check our students' work really carefully, is to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen. So it was taken really seriously as well, which I was really happy to see. It's definitely not a joke. Just a comment too, that if out of because those are two migratory species, with the great blue heron and the swallows, I think that they have left the area by now, that maybe it's a bit safer to go. I don't know.
Several species who decide not to go from time to time, and I'm not sure whether there are members of those two tribes or not.
That's fair.
But I would have a concern if they are there, because one of our opportunities probably is to look at a seasonal wildlife preserve here. And it would include nesting and breeding, hatch and brood time period, probably taking up 6-8 months each year. It'd just be out of bounds, excepting with naturalists under strict conditions, no dogs, and so on, and probably some restriction off the river as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it's an opportunity. I think it's a better opportunity we've had in most of the years that I've been doing this kind of work.
Gotcha. There's a question here. Are you opposed to, actually, well, this is not regarding Ricardo Ranch. I'm just going to come back to that in a minute if we got some time. Hold music.
I didn't see anything new coming in there.
No, hey? Okay. I'll go back to that one then if you haven't seen anything new. It just was a question about the berms. If you're opposed to the building of the berms along the Bow Crescent, but I think you might have answered that in the chat too, but feel free to comment on that, Anne.
Yeah, I think there was just a clarification. Maybe Bill wasn't super clear maybe, but yeah, we're not opposed to the berms in Bowness as an organization. We've been asked by some of the folks who the vocal groups in Bowness to support them in opposing the berms, and we said no. Thanks for asking.
It's the least of the evils.
Yeah, as Bill says, it's a least of some of the evils. But I mean, I think they probably need both the berm and the dam. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. It's unsure. It's not clear to me what the timeline is on the dam. There's definitely been a bunch of planning, sort of, desktop work done on it so far.
Sure, quiet. I haven't heard anything about that, but yeah. So Sarah's yeah, Sarah's on our team as well, and she thanks Sarah for adding this in. There is some information. There's an online engagement opportunity. I think it's in person and online, if I'm not mistaken, next Monday. Is that right, Nathan? It's in person or online?
Yeah,
I think it's just online.
Yeah, it's just online, and I should
online.
note that they send out individual links. So if you want to attend, you have to register ahead of time, because they'll send you an individualized link to that. So you can't just pop in. So if you do want to attend that, they'll answer your questions. I mean, I met with them earlier this week, and they were very attentive, and I think they want to hear this stuff. I mean, part of it is they want to do this so they can say we consulted, we heard their concerns, we've done this, this, and this. But at the same time, if nobody goes, then they say we tried, nobody cared, so it's obviously fine. So if you care, go to it. I mean, it's sort of the best of two bad options, but you attend.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, I want to say that I don't think we gain anything by being antagonistic when we're discussing directly with the different stakeholders. Because if you go in there and tell them that this shouldn't be built, this is a terrible idea, why are you doing this, you're destroying our community, they're going to be like, well, fair enough. And then they're just going to move on, right?
Yeah.
If they hear something thoughtful, if they hear something that is perhaps even feasible, that will make it better. And again, you're not talking to the people that are making the ultimate decision, but you're talking to people that are also lobbying as much as we're lobbying, and more than we're lobbying even, because they have the capacity to do that. And so they need to hear this stuff too. You know, it's not the same as talking to an elected official, but it's still worth your time, and it's still worth bringing forward the best arguments that you can in the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Yeah, be constructive, ask those questions, be engaging with them. And yeah, that's a really, really great point, because it's natural to get frustrated sometimes, for sure. But this is a great opportunity to be heard and you know, listen to one another and you know, really engage with some people on this. And you're equipping us too with a lot of great information tonight to take there and ask some of those questions again, and to voice some of the ideas and some concerns and that. And I'll just note for people who are maybe watching this later, in the chat, thanks again, Sarah, there's a note. So it's Brookfield and Genesis are hosting it next Monday at 6 p.m. Calgary time. You can email, and I'll just spell it out, as B as in Bob, N as in Nancy, A, U, D as in dog, at B as in Bob, A, studios.ca. So BASTUDIOS.ca. Or you can call 403 692 4364 to register to get your own link to go. So that's great. Yeah. So please do go. That would be terrific. Darren's kindly put in some links there to the counselors. Oh, Sarah mentioned that she did see a heron there last week around that general area. So yeah, just to be cautious and about that. Yeah, does anybody else have any questions or any comments? I know we have quite a group here. What I can do, actually, why don't I do this? I'll close down our video that's going to be heading onto YouTube. But I'll just keep all of you on if you want to have a chat after. Just want to thank everybody for joining. You make this well worthwhile. And what a fantastic turnout tonight. So thanks everybody for sharing with all your groups and on social media and everything, because you know, one person, and it might be you being the person, really can make a difference. So keep your hope up, and use this information for good, not evil, and go and see what you know, hopefully you can make a difference out there. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Nathan.
Thanks, everyone.